All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Gridiron Gurus podcast. Today, me and Nick here will be doing our NFL offensive free agent predictions for the top free agents at each positional group. We timestamps below if you'd like to skip around. And of course, we're going to start with the quarterbacks, though. Sam Darnold, one of the high-priced free agents available right now, 27 years old, coming off of a career season, a resurgence in his career with the Vikings, 4,300 yards, 35 touchdowns, led them to a lot of victories. Early exit in the playoffs, though. Did have 12 interceptions, would often hold the ball way too long to take sacks. But overall, this is a guy that had played phenomenal football throughout the year. Certainly much better than most people probably thought he would be as a bridge for J.J. McCarthy. But I think they're probably going to end up parting ways. And he's going to go elsewhere as the Vikings don't have, a large surplus of money. And of course, they did spend that first-round pick last year on a QB. 2 year, $70 million, I think, is going to be the expected value for him. I think Indianapolis, the Colts, make a lot of sense for me just because they've talked about how they want to bring in competition for Anthony Richardson, who just hasn't been very consistent, hasn't been able to fully stay on the field when it comes to health as well. I think this is the greatest way to kind of protect you on both sides. Richardson will have an opportunity to, have that competition from a guy that's kind of red hot. And the Colts don't have the worst supporting cast in the world. This is a team that's pretty good up front. They have a great running back. They have some young weapons as well. So I think this would be the best situation for the Colts, where quarterback's been a bit of a revolving door, Nick, since Andrew Luck retired. I don't know if this would fully secure the future for them, but I think the upside's worth it for Indianapolis. You're going with a reunion with the Jets, which I think's a little iffy, and I even said that, months ago. I was like, could he go back to the Jets? I just don't think that's going to happen. It was just such an abysmal failure last time, and this organization's been getting criticized left and right as of late. Darnold's with the Colts for me. You think he's going to go back to New York with the Jets?
Yeah, this is one that I feel like I'm rolling the dice a little bit here, but I think it could make sense. I can certainly see why he wouldn't want to go back to the Jets, right? A team that, really put him in a bad spot. They were horrible when he played there. But this Jets team, they've gotten better since he left. I think there's a fair amount of talent that he could throw to on this roster. Garrett Wilson, Alan Lazard, I think is really good. Devontae Adams, if he returns. You got Brees Hall behind you as well to help you out as your running back. I think, Tyler Conklin's a really good tight end. They'll probably make some moves in the draft as well. Malachi Corley, maybe he could turn into something. I know he had a bit of a disappointing season this year, but maybe he could end up selling for this team. At the right price, Darnold might look at it and say, hey, I can go back, try to redeem myself, be the hero for this franchise that's been needing a starting quarterback. I was supposed to be the hero when I got drafted. Didn't work out. Now I've kind of revived my career, got comfortable. He had a really good season when you talk about it. 4,300 yards passing, really good numbers there. The fifth highest passer in the NFL, a really impressive number there, the 35 touchdowns as well. He may not want to take a punt, and go back to New York and try to see if he can make that work, but I think it could be really interesting if it does happen. This could be something that could be really cool, really good redemption story, and could be a good way to get back and say, like, look, I could still be the guy and really make things happen here. The roster's a lot better now. The offensive line's getting a little bit better as well. This could really work out well. It could be a really interesting move, kind of a gamble that could really work out well for both parties.
Now, I have the Jets landing a guy on a similar 2 year deal for significantly less money as Justin Fields parts with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Him and Russell Wilson, very interesting stuff going on there where he started the first couple games of the year and went 4-2, played respectable ball until Wilson was healthy. He came back and he went 6-5 as the starter. Wasn't a bad year, 2,400 yards, 16 touchdowns, 5 picks. But for the most part, Russell Wilson, his best days are certainly behind him. He's 36 years old. Justin Fields is the young gun, and if I were Pittsburgh and I was going to decide between one of these two, let's go ahead and give the young guy in Fields an opportunity because he plays well enough. He can be here for the next 5 to 10 years with his age. Russell Wilson, not so much, but I think ultimately that's what the Steelers are going to do. I think Fields is going to look to go to New York, where the Jets, they have a big, kind of like the Giants as well. They both have big issues at quarterback, and I think that they're going to be the ones that try and take advantage of that youthfulness that you can also get at a pretty bargain contract, $15 million per year, I would assume. Russell Wilson getting a little bit more, commanding $25 million over a 1 year deal with Pittsburgh to remain there. This is really going to determine the whole carousel, Nick. What happens with Pittsburgh and who they opt to bring back? If either of them come back, what do you think is going to happen here?
Yeah, Pittsburgh's certainly the most fascinating player in terms of the teams that are trying to figure out their quarterback situation. I think they end up keeping Fields, right? I think it makes a lot of sense for them to keep Fields. I'm a big Fields fan. I've been a big Fields fan since day one. I thought he was a quarterback that you could really make something happen with. I think there's still a ton of raw talent there, and while we haven't seen him reach the expectations so far, I still think he's a really good quarterback that can make things happen. Had about 1,000 yards passing and 5 touchdowns in the games that he played, and they were playing decent football before they went to Russell Wilson, and they continue to play decent football. The Steelers Steelers, they like to stick with what's familiar, like to continue to roll back some of the same sort of traditions, same players over and over again. I think they end up keeping Fields and letting Russell Wilson walk, who I end up having go to the Browns, which is certainly might people look at that and say that's a really weird spot for him to land. But I think that could make sense for the team. Russell Wilson might take a gamble on that one as well. I think Fields would be really good for the Steelers. This is a team that hasn't really found a way to get over the hump. They get to the playoffs every single year. They have a winning record every single year, but they're clearly in that position where they're just stuck in no man's land where they can't compete for a Super Bowl, but they also are not bad enough to compete for high draft picks. So they're kind of just stuck in that middle zone. I think they're going to continue being stuck there. That's what they want to do, it feels like. And I think Justin Fields is a great quarterback to really keep you in that position. He's a guy that's going to win you games, but he's not going to get you to the Super Bowl, and he's not going to lose you enough games to get you a top pick either. I think they bring back Fields on a 2-year deal, see what they can do with him, see if they can use his legs in the offense as well, and see what they can develop around him.
They certainly did that at times, used his legs a good bit. He just was not the best downfield passer for them. They just didn't really seem to have that threat in their offense when he started those 6 games. So I think even though it seems like right now he's the preference for him, I don't think he's going to return to them ultimately. And we both have Rodgers to the Giants. I think this one could really work out for the G-men because your alternatives are what? Losing games with Drew Lock, how's that going to be any different compared to the upside you would have when you compare the two? And I know there's no QBs under contract right now, but that's what you're kind of looking at. You're kind of a tier 3 quarterback. Rodgers, his best days are also behind him. The Jets experiment failed miserably, and now he's going to hit the open market. I think for $15 million, you can get him to be around an offense that has some nice young up-and-coming talent, guys like Tyrone Tracy, Malik Neighbors. You have a defense I think's pretty darn good, Nick, and I know there's teams every year that shock us, and they can be unsung surprises, and I definitely think that it could pay off for the Giants with that defense and Rodgers coming in there working with these young guys. Again, the alternate is what? Losing games with a guy that's not going to give you the same upside. That's kind of the philosophy I'm seeing here. I think Rodgers would be a really good fit here. Not too much money, and I definitely think that he can win you some games, maybe get you to the playoffs, and now we're cooking, Nick. I know those are unrealistic expectations, but that's kind of the vision I have here.
As a Giants fan, I think you are getting way ahead of yourself there. Those are some crazy things. Unironically, this is the best quarterback room the Giants have had in the last 5 years, with having nobody in the room. That's just better than what they had in the past. This is a quarterback room that's been horrible. The Daniel Jones experiment failed miserably. Drew Lock, was fun at times. The Tommy DeVito thing was, obviously hysterical, but it's not a sustainable thing at all. This is a team that's terrible. I don't like any of these quarterbacks in the draft class. I don't really think they're worth taking right now. I think Aaron Rodgers is a bridge quarterback till you figure out what's next. Sure, why not at this point? This team is not going anywhere. This team is not going to be competitive. This team is not going to make the playoffs. So why not put Rodgers in there? I'll add a little bit of flair. He's a veteran that's really good, really accurate passer. Still got something left in the tank. It's certainly a headline. It's a story in New York. This city, this market's all about, generating headlines to get fan interest. Bringing in Aaron Rodgers, who's coming from the neighbor on the other side of the building. That generates some headlines, in my opinion. I think it's worth taking a punt on if you're the Giants. They really don't have any better options. Like you said, there's really nobody on this list that I think they would make a run at, maybe besides Sam Darnold. But even then, I don't know if that's going to do much considering the state of the O-line for the Giants right now. I do agree for the defense. I think is really good. I'm really confident in the Giants defense. I love watching the Giants on defense. When I'm watching them on Sundays, I don't want to watch the offense at all because it's a train wreck, but I love watching the defense. I think this defense is really good. There's a lot of good guys who work really hard. The defensive line is very strong. They get a ton of sacks, a ton of quarterback pressures. The secondary, I like what they've done with that unit as well. So I have faith in the defense going forward. I just don't have faith in the offense right now. And I think, maybe Arch Manning could be the future quarterback in the future for this team, somebody else in the draft class next year. So go ahead, take Rodgers on a year flyer, see what he can do, have some fun with it. If you win a couple of games, sure, why not? If you lose a bunch of games, sure, even better, you can get a better draft pick in the next year's draft. Maybe make a trade if you don't lose enough games. I think taking Rodgers here on a flyer for 1 year, see what he can do, could be a lot of fun. It would be certainly a good storyline for the rest of the league to watch.
Now let's go ahead and move to the running backs. We'll kind of keep this one quick and short because there's not much really expected to happen here. Their top 4 guys, you see them on screen. Aaron Jones, I think expectations he'll return to Minnesota. They got $63 million available. Give him 10 a year over the next 2. Nice dual threat back. Still had a really good season, 1,100 plus yards, 5 rushing touchdowns. I thought, his efficiency for them was pretty good. So I think that's a guy you could certainly count on even at 30 years old. I think J.K. Dobbins coming off a nice season resurgence for him as well. 905 yards, 9 touchdowns, 4.6 yards per carry. I think Harbaugh's certainly going to want to keep this guy in the building on a cheap deal, a relatively cheap deal. That's at $3.5 million. The thing is, this running back class is so good. And if I got any of these pending free agents, I'm probably letting them walk. And I think Najee Harris, this is a guy who's really struggled with efficiency. I know he had a pretty solid season this past year. But I think him going to the Raiders makes a lot of sense here. $24 million over 3 years. They're looking for an RB1. I know they've had a handful of different guys like Amir Abdullah, Alexander Mattison last year, gave them a lot of different reps. I think they'll go ahead and go with Najee Harris, though, to kind of fill that void that Josh Jacobs had left. And Nick Chubb, I really don't know what's going to happen with him because he's coming off another bad injury. You think the Chiefs make sense here, Nick? And at first I was like, that's a silly prediction, but I think it could really make some sense because the Chiefs are going to maximize what he still has left to a T. Going back to the Browns, would that really make sense? I don't know. I'm going to pick it anyways.
While I was sitting here making my list, I really struggled, like you said, I struggled to figure out what to do with Nick Chubb coming off that injury. Still a player that I think has something left in the tank. And I thought, what's a team that brings in veterans who have struggled at other teams, brings in guys that are still difference makers on cheap deals and bring them in to kind of try and figure out what they can fit in their offense. Oh yeah, the Chiefs. This is a team that they don't necessarily need a running back, but if you can bring in a guy like Nick Chubb on a cheap deal, get him involved in the offense, I think it could really work out for the Chiefs. We've seen them rehabilitate, careers that are not going so well, bring in guys who have had struggles at different places. DeAndre Hopkins is one I think of where they brought him in. That was in a trade, but still, I think they could bring Nick Chubb in here and just kind of throw him in the offense for a little bit, see what you can do. I think this could be kind of fun for the Chiefs to do. I know people don't really root for the Chiefs unless you're a Chiefs fan, but I think it'll be kind of fun to see Chubb play for the Chiefs and could kind of see what he can do with his career. Not say he's going to light the world on fire, but I think he'd be your serviceable back in that offense. It really could add a next little step there to get that team back to try and get back to the Super Bowl and try and back to winning Super Bowls after they fell this February.
And, talk on Harris returning to the Steelers a little bit. They certainly do have the money. I think they need to use it elsewhere, Nick, because this team, they just need weapons. And at running back, it's pretty self-explanatory. We've said it for years, of course. Now the rest of the league is caught up. You can get great production on cheap deals. I think he's gone, and they're going to use that money elsewhere.
I just fear that the Steelers, like I said about Justin Fields, they like to just run it back and bring the same players back, and they don't seem to find any issues what they're doing. They have the same coach for a very long time. They consistently win, 9, 8, 9, 10 games. They get in the playoffs and they get knocked out in the first round. I feel like they're content with where they are, ownership and the general manager's office. They don't seem to want to make any drastic moves, which they do have to. This team is stuck in neutral, but I think that's the problem. They're stuck in neutral. They're going to keep making moves in neutral, and bringing back Najee Harris would be the most neutral move they could do. Do I think Najee Harris is a phenomenal back? No, but I think he's a really good back that has some good moments so far in his Pittsburgh Steelers career. Sure, he might get some more money somewhere else, but I think he ends up back at Pittsburgh. They're just going to run it back and see what they can do again, continue, trying the same thing, going in circles and not really getting anywhere. It just feels like the most Pittsburgh Steelers move right now to bring back Harris on a, team-friendly deal, a deal that works out for both parties, and go and really not change anything. And that offense just continues to look the same way they looked the last, 5 years or so.
Yeah, good analysis there, I would say. Moving to the wide receiver position, kind of top heavy here, but I think there's some good depth as well. There's guys like Darius Slayton, who I think will go to the Chargers. Mike Williams is back on the market. Deontay Johnson, if he cares to play football. Was it Hollywood Brown, DeAndre Hopkins for the Chiefs. Those guys are available. I think the Chiefs will bring both of them back. But in terms of these top four here, these could make a big impact, and I think all playoff contenders are going to be looking to eye some of these guys down. Chris Godwin, I believe he'll return about $15 million per season to the Bucs. He would have had his fourth straight 1,000-yard season if he didn't dislocate that ankle, bad ankle injury against the Ravens. I was in attendance for that game. They were down big late, and he was still out there, and it was an unfortunate situation. So I hope they do right by him and bring him back to Tampa Bay. Amari Cooper, what's going to happen with him? Because this guy just 2 years ago had a phenomenal season with Joe Flacco when the Browns brought in with the Bills this past season. Had some games where he got a lot of targets. Other games didn't see the field as much. I know, trying to fit in with a playoff contender late in the year, Nick, can certainly be dicey. So I think the Bills bringing him back would make a lot of bit of sense. But I think the Steelers, they're going to look to make some moves with their weapons. I know that you're not very confident in them doing that. And so my confidence level is also kind of brought down by that. But I think $14 million per year to still get a very good receiver who's a veteran that can catch the football would make sense for Pittsburgh. And then Stephon Diggs. I myself thought about picking him to go join his brother with the Cowboys. The problem is they just don't have a lot of bit of money. I think they'll probably end up creating some. And they would love to have a wide receiver number 2. So I think he'll stay in Texas, Nick, between Houston or Dallas. Those are going to be the only landing spots for him.
Yeah, I think Diggs, you're looking at two options here, Houston or go to Dallas. I feel like he'll go to Dallas. They'll find a way to make the money work. Jerry Jones needs a more reliable wide receiver. Needs another star, man, another guy you can market here. They need some weapons on that offense. That offense was really struggling after Dak went down. They really need to find a way to get some offensive weapons in there. Stephon Diggs, I think, still has a ton left in the tank. He's such a talented wide receiver. I think this move makes a lot of sense for him. His brother's also involved with the Cowboys, so that'd be another good reason there. It could really work out well. At $15 million, I don't think it's that bad of a deal necessarily for the Cowboys. You bring in a proven wide receiver who can be really good for your offense. I think it's a win-win for both parties.
I think a one-year deal over the aforementioned $15 million makes a lot of sense for him coming off an injury at the age of 31. His production has been great throughout his entire career, though, over 10,000 yards, He has 70 touchdowns as well. I mean, that's phenomenal production. So I think he can still offer a lot. And I think the Texans would like to extend that experiment one more year because things looked really good for them when they made that trade. Their Super Bowl odds went up dramatically. And I think they would kind of like to see this story maybe finish itself out in 2025. And then the last one here, Keenan Allen. I think, he doesn't want to return to Chicago at all. It's time for him to go back home, right? He played college in California many years ago in Berkeley. Seems like he's going to go to the West Coast, San Francisco, Arizona, LA, one of those teams. I think he's going to look to play for a playoff contender, though, Nick, and kind of like Diggs with the two teams that we have listed. The two teams for Allen, that's where he's going to end up going. I think the San Francisco 49ers after moving on from Debo, who are off the hook, it looks like, for all of that money. They still have a lot of dead cap and whatnot, but I think that freed some up. We'll have to check on that. But I think him going to the 49ers for only 25 over 2 years would be a phenomenal steal for the Niners, and Allen would be in a great system as well.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Allen has to go to the West Coast this moment in time. I think there's really only two options: either the Niners or the one I went with the Rams. The Rams, they're making a lot of different moves. Obviously, a wide receiver, they're moving a bunch of different pieces around. Sean McVay wants to make a couple different things happen. I think Keenan Allen still has a lot left in the tank and still be really solid for this team. The Rams, I think they're a team. They're bringing back Matthew Stafford. They clearly want to still contend. They still believe that that's the quarterback that can lead them. I felt the Rams had a pretty solid season. I thought they looked good as potential sneaky Super Bowl contenders when they got to the playoffs this past season. I like what the roster could do. I think Allen would be a really good add. I'm going to touch on Amari Cooper. I didn't get to touch on him. I think playing for the Bears could make a lot of sense. This is a Bears team that want to have weapons for Caleb Williams. If Allen leaves, that's a weapon you're losing. Bring in Amari Cooper, a guy that still has a lot left in the tank. He's been really good in football. He hasn't had a great season as of late, but I think he's still a really talented wide receiver that could be a good guy to get a lot of targets, could be really involved in the offense, and an offense for the Bears that needs to develop and get better. You got to give weapons for Caleb Williams. They got to get somebody for him to throw to. I think Amari Cooper would be a great add for the Bears.
And I move to the offensive line. We'll start with the offensive tackles and then cap things off the next slide with the interior linemen. Ronnie Stanley is one of the top free agents available. Returning to the Ravens, I think Baltimore would love that, but they also don't have too much money to work with themselves, and this guy's going to command a big payday. Who has the most money? New England, $127 million available. They're going to throw him 70 over 3 years, maybe even more, because you kind of need an incentive to go play for New England. The Patriots, obviously, a report had came out recently that nobody wants to go there, and it's kind of something we've always said for a while, Nick. With no Brady, there's not much attraction. But I think Vrabel being in town, Drake May as well, all this money, they're going to start to build a foundation around him. Stanley would be a great step in the right direction as a phenomenal pass protector. He's been doing it for a while now. Finally was healthy this past year. I think this would be a great addition for New England, that is. Cam Robinson, I think he'll return to the Vikings because they have a little bit of money to work with, and they traded him from the Jaguars with the intention of, I think, re-signing him 45 over 3 years. That also makes a good amount of sense. What do you think of these two top tackles on the market, Nick? Because you have them both switching teams. You have another team that has, the second most cap in the Raiders, and I'd certainly rather live in Las Vegas than New England, so I think that would make a lot of sense there. But it seems like one of these bottom barrel teams are going to end up with Stanley, and then you have the Chiefs plugging a major hole at left tackle that's been just a revolving door for them this past year.
So I look at Ronnie Stanley, I think the Ravens would love for him to come back, and I think he would like to return to Baltimore, but I just don't think they can work out a deal with the money that the Ravens money, bit of cap issue that they have. So now you go to the Raiders, who got a plethora of money. That's a ton of money out there, and they need some tackle help. That offensive line needs a lot of work, and you can plug in Stanley at left tackle, and he'd be so good for them. I think he'd be a really solid piece. They got the money to do it, and like you said, I'd rather live in Vegas than New England, I can tell you that much. And New England absolutely bombed as a franchise in terms of, what other players think of it. They got a horrible review, which I don't blame them. I've heard terrible things about Gillette. I've heard terrible things about the environment up there in New England. Like you said, without Brady, without Belichick, it seems like some of the magic of the Patriots has worn off a little bit. They're just now a shell of themselves. So I don't know if I'd want to make that move if I was him. And look at Cam Robinson. The Chiefs, that if you want to highlight an issue for the Chiefs, which there's very difficult to find one, takes a long time for you to find a problem. Left tackle, that's a problem. The Chiefs have an issue there all the time. This could be a good option to go grab Cam Robinson, get him in there, plug in a guy that is going to be really consistent and a star player for your team, and fix that problem that's been a revolving door. Get a consistent left tackle in there at not the worst price tag in the world. I think it makes a lot of sense for the team. Again, like I said, the Chiefs, they want to find a way to get back to the Super Bowl, get back to winning Super Bowls. I think you plug in a guy like Robinson that could really help you go a long way in that department.
The Chiefs also have cap problems of their own, but I certainly think a lot of these teams are going to figure it out, other than New Orleans, who negative $50 million again. So Dan Moore's the Steelers. I think they'll go ahead and bring him back on a relatively cheap deal because I think he played well enough this past season. They, for a left tackle, they can bring him back for 52 over 4 years, and that's a pretty respectable deal for a starting left tackle in this league. That the thing is he wasn't perfect this past year. Still gave up 12 sacks. Of course, you're playing 1,100 snaps, but I think that's a good amount of number for a guy that has played 4 straight years as a left tackle. He hasn't been great. Hasn't been bad, though, so I think he's certainly going to command that amount of money. What is that, about 13, 14 a year? I think that's a respectable deal to bring him back. You have the Patriots snagging him instead. So I anticipate the Steelers are going to go heavy or the Patriots, that is, are going to go heavy with the offensive line. I have Stanley, you have Moore for a little bit cheaper of a deal.
Yeah, I think if they whiff on Stanley, they go and get Moore. I think Moore could certainly just run back to the Steelers, like I keep saying about every Steelers potential free agent on this list. Really, that feels like that's the big option for the Steelers right now. But I think if the Patriots miss on Stanley, they need to find somebody to bring in. They bring in Moore, who I think could be really solid for them. Could pay him a little bit more than the Steelers probably could. They could afford to gamble a little bit more and put some more money in his pocket and maybe convince him to make the move up to New England. That could really work out for both parties. They need help in the offensive line. They got to protect their golden goose in Drake May and get a really solid tackle who's not a world beater by any stretch of the imagination, but I think he's a good enough player, a steady hand you can put on your offensive line.
And then the last guy here, Morgan Moses. I think this is an underrated addition for some team. This guy's been in the league for a long time. He's about to be 34 years old when the season starts. We have him going back to two of his former teams. Was in Washington for a long time. Spent a couple years for Baltimore. He was very good. Now this is a guy who is a right tackle, so the Ravens, that is, would probably move Roger Rosengarten, I would assume, over to left. But I think this is a guy who's been a real brick in pass protection his entire career, even as he ages. And I think the Ravens are going to need some guys that can come in on their offensive line for cheap. And I think that makes sense for them. And then for Washington, probably not the strongest need in the world, but I think bringing him back now that you're winning to the team that he, played and did so much for early on in his career, that does make a lot of sense to me, Nick. They definitely have a lot of money to work with. I don't think that he'll be the long-term answer by any means, but Brandon Coleman wasn't exactly elite for them at left tackle. He's a young guy that could use some mentorship. So I think one of these two options makes sense.
Yeah, no, Morgan Moses is not going back to the Jets. That door has certainly slammed shut. He will not be going back to the Jets, I can tell you that much. But we have two former teams here. I think, I thought about the Ravens certainly, but the Commanders, the team that he started his career with, I think that could make sense. I know they don't necessarily need him, but like you said, you rattled off a few points there that I like. Could be a good mentor player, a good guy that kind of bridges the gap to a future tackle that could be better for this offense. The Commanders, they got a lot of money. Their team is really solid. They don't have a whole lot of holes. So you can go in and bring a guy like Moses, good veteran leadership, get him in the locker room on a cheap deal. I think it makes a lot of sense.
The Commanders do have holes on the defense, though. That's one thing that they're probably going to spend a lot of money on. And, the supporting cast they're going to try and round out. So I don't expect them to be too heavy with the money, especially since, Coleman is a young guy. I think it makes sense to try and coach him up, even though he did have a bit of a tough season this past year. Look at the interior offensive line. Drew Dahlman, I love watching this guy, center for the Falcons. He's going to command anywhere from 60 to $80 million. As a Jaguar fan, I'd love for him to come fill a void for us, but I think the Titans, with the money they have available, they're going to go ahead and make a big addition here. $50 million in cap space. They're going to give a big chunk of it here to him. You have the Bears, Nick. They obviously have a lot of holes on the offensive line across the board. I think everyone's job's up for grabs there. Both those teams need some reconstruction, so the top interior guy goes off the board to fill a need. And I think that the Patriots, they're not only going to land Stanley, but they're going to land Will Fries as well. He got injured last year, but before that, he was putting on a show for the Colts for a couple of seasons. He can anchor one of those guard spots for you. Those are going to be your two top dollar guys. And, Nick, as a Giants fan, you have them bringing Fries to town. What do you make of the top two guys on the board?
Yeah, I really hope the Giants find a way to bring Fries to town. This team needs help on the offensive line. I think he'd be a really good player. You get a veteran that's got some good experience. Dahlman, I love him as well. I love watching him. He's a very underrated player, has had a really solid career. Love for the Giants to try and make a run at him as well. But I think the Bears will outbid them and bring them in. That Bears offensive line needs a ton of help, and this is a guy that's a good veteran experience at center, a really knowledgeable high football IQ, a really solid player for his team. Bring him in for the Bears, find a way to get him into that offensive line, plug some holes in the interior. Could really work out for the Bears. I think that'd be a phenomenal ad for them, and I hope the Giants find a way, but I would not be surprised if Fries goes to the Pats or maybe goes to the Bears or the Titans. I think all four of those teams we're looking at will make swings at the top two interior offensive line pieces. We'll be curious where they end up.
Yeah, for Fries, he had a lot of momentum building over the last 2 years. Didn't play much in his first two seasons, but over the last two, he really started to improve his game. So it'll be interesting to see what his market ends up being at the end of the day. Moved to Tevin Jenkins. This guy was a high draft pick in the second round back in 2021. Started off pretty bumpy, but he's another guy who also really started to find his footing as of late and could be in for a pretty big payday. My contract kind of seems a little bit low, maybe to Will Fries. If you add one more year, be kind of similar in terms of money. 3 year, $40 million. The Jaguars have a hole on the interior. This guy can play either guard spot. was playing left side the past couple of seasons. And then the 49ers, their interior offensive line could use a boost as well. That seems like such a San Francisco pick right there, Nick. I love what you did there.
Yeah, I think this makes a lot of sense for San Fran. They could use a little bit of help in the interior. This is a team that, I know they missed the playoffs this past season, but they find themselves in a good position with a good roster. They got rid of the headache, which, moving on from Debo, making that situation go away. They've made some other moves here and there. They've been solid. They've been able to figure something out and kind of start to set this team up properly. I think this could really be an offensive line piece. And Jenkins, that could be really good for this team. You plug him in there, he could be really solid. I like the direction that team is heading. I think that team is still really solid. They got a pretty easy schedule this year coming up as well. Plug in Jenkins there, I think they'll have a lot of success.
And in the last one here, I did my predictions before, Nick, but we both somehow ended up on Arizona, a team that also has a lot of holes, especially on their offensive line. Mekhi Becton, what in terms of money will he command? I'm not sure. I put, $10.6 million per season. Abysmal start to his career. This is a guy who's still incredibly massive, 6'7", almost 360 pounds. They moved him inside the guard for the Eagles, and he's coming off a phenomenal season, really resurgence in terms of his career, really struggled as a tackle early on in his career. So it looks like him moving inside has really made him a lot of money. And I think the Eagles would love to bring him back. I think he'd love to stay in Philly, but they have other priorities with limited money available. And I think he'll find his way to Arizona, who will end up being a top bidder for Becton.
Yeah, I think Becton could certainly return to the Eagles. Of the players on this list that I had flipping teams, this is the one I feel the worst about. I think I feel the best about him potentially returning to Eagles. Returning to the Eagles of the players that I picked to flip teams, and the players obviously that I picked to return to teams, and they'll return to their teams. But Becton, he revived his career. His career seemed dead at the Jets. It really wasn't working out. It seemed like a total bust. But he went to Philly. He's figured it out. They played him on the interior. He was really good this season. You watch the film on him. It was really strong this year. He was really good. I'm sure the Eagles love to have him back. But Arizona, they might be able to pay a lot more, and I think that's an interesting project as well. They could use some offensive line help. They have a team that's still in a good position, in my opinion, heading in the right direction that could start to develop. They have some young talent out there that could really be solid. I think Becton will be really good for the Cardinals. I'm not surprised you and I both went there. We kind of think the same on that regard, and it could really make a lot of sense for the Cardinals. It could make a lot of sense for Becton. He gets a nice payday. If he plays at the same level, it could be really solid for him.
That caps off our offensive predictions for some of the top guys available. Plenty of depth at these positions, though, that we didn't cover. Appreciate you joining me, Nick. This was fun to do this free agency getting underway here in a couple of days. A lot of this stuff really will affect how the draft goes down in April, so I'm excited to see how this all pans out.
Yeah, some seriously fascinating names on here, some really interesting picks, some guys staying with the teams they're currently on, some guys making some radical changes. I'm really excited to see what free agency looks like.
Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.